Confession: I, 20F, am haunted by the things I did as a teenager, and I've never managed to shake the feeling that I'm still being punished for it. It was during my sophomore year of high school that everything spiraled out of control. I was struggling to find my place, caught between the cliques and social hierarchies that reorganize themselves every week like shifting sands. My best friend, Lily, was the one constant in my life, with her wild laughter and fierce loyalty. We bonded over our shared love for dark fantasy novels and late-night horror movie marathons, imagining worlds in which we could escape the cruel realities of high school. But as the pressures of social acceptance mounted, I found myself drawn to another crowd, the popular kids, whose easy confidence illustrated a kind of life I wanted to taste. They were magnetic, and I foolishly thought that if I could just fit in with them, all my insecurities would disappear. The turning point came one afternoon in a crowded cafeteria, right after Lily had confided in me about her struggle with depression. Instead of comforting her, I chose a different path. To gain favor with the popular girls, I can't quite recall their names now, only the memories of laughter mixed with biting judgment, I told them some private things about Lily, spun them into gossip that spread faster than I ever anticipated. In my mind, I justified my betrayal as a means of survival, a twisted version of friendship where I could climb the social ladder. For a fleeting moment, it worked. I was included in their conversations, invited to their parties, and even got a taste of that coveted high school popularity. But as the days turned into weeks, the guilt began to gnaw at the edges of my newfound confidence. Watching Lily withdraw into herself, I felt the weight of my betrayal like chains wrapping around my heart, pulling me deeper into despair. There were days when I thought about approaching her, trying to explain that I never intended to hurt her, but each time I opened my mouth to speak, the words died before they could escape. Instead, she slowly drifted away, finding solace with new friends who had no connection to me, the girl who had torn her down. The remorse that consumed me was relentless. Nights were spent tossing and turning, reliving that day in the cafeteria, watching her face crumple at the realization of my treachery. Now, in the present, I've grown into a person still marred by that impulsive decision. I get countless reminders of how I lost a friend who had been my anchor, someone who had trusted me with her deepest fears, and who I had betrayed in her most vulnerable moment. Each time I hear laughter echoing down the halls or see pictures of happy faces posting perfect memories, I feel her absence as sharply as the day she walked away. A few months ago, I attempted to reach out, crafting a simple apology via text, but all I received was silence. Maybe her new friends had filled that void I left, and maybe I deserved the void too. Yet, with each unanswered message, the past clings more tightly, like a dark cloud looming over my future. In a moment of desperation, I decided to visit our old haunts, our favorite cafe, the park bench where we spent countless afternoons discussing our dreams and fears, but it felt foreign without her laughter ringing in the air. Strangely enough, as I sat there staring at the now familiar view, I felt a sense of clarity. It dawned on me that while I could not change the past, the weight of that guilt could either crush me or serve as a reminder to be better. Life is messy, and though I lost someone irreplaceable, I could still choose to learn from my mistakes, to grow in ways that would honor her memory. So, I made a silent vow, to treat others with the kindness I had once betrayed, to be the confidant I had failed to be, and, in doing so, maybe one day I would find the courage to reach out to Lily once more, not as someone who had hurt her, but as someone who had learned to be a better friend. For those interested in how my journey unfolds, I'll keep updating. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll find a way to mend what was irrevocably broken, or at least, I hope to find solace in the company of new friends along the way. As the days turned into weeks, my silent vow became both my anchor and my weight. I often found myself wandering through the halls of my university, heart pounding at the possibility of coming across someone who might remind me of those ghostly echoes of my past, particularly Lily. The campus was a blend of laughter, vibrant conversations, and the promise of new beginnings, yet it felt like a tapestry woven from the threads of secrets and unspoken regrets for me. I would catch glimpses of groups of friends sharing moments that I had once deemed unimportant, quick jokes, supportive nudges, and those shared looks that seemed to resonate with a deeper understanding. My thoughts would drift back to that fateful day when my world split at the seams, when I chose to stand idly by as Lily bore the brunt of our peers' laughter, as they tore into her, like wolves feasting on carrion. I could still see the way those tears shimmered in her eyes, deep pools of sadness and betrayal, the moment she turned away from the crowd, seeking escape where there was none. It was a sight forever etched in my mind, a cruel reminder of my own cowardice. With every new interaction, I sought small ways to connect with others, To infuse kindness into simple gestures, whether that meant smiling at a stranger or offering a helping hand when I saw someone struggling. Each moment was a reminder that vulnerability is not a weakness but a bridge to stronger relationships. It was in one of these small interactions during a group project that I met Jenna, a girl with a contagious laugh and an uncanny ability to find joy even in the most mundane discussions. She had shared a story about her childhood dog, a scrappy little mutt who had managed to steal her heart. Listening to her animated recounting was a balm to my soul. I could feel something warming inside me that had long been dormant. As weeks wove new comfort between us, our friendship blossomed, slowly stitching up my jagged edges, but I still found myself haunted by my past. On evenings when the sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky was awash with oranges and purples, I would often retreat to a quiet bench by the campus lake. I cherished those still moments, the way the water reflected the fading light, tranquil yet tumultuous, exactly how I felt of late. But it was during one of those evenings that a thought struck me like lightning. Perhaps I could reach out to Lily, not to recreate what we had, but to apologize without expectation, to show her that I had changed, that I was committed to growth. There it was, this flicker of hope. It felt almost reckless, but wasn't it just as reckless to hold on to fear? After a restless night, I typed out a message to her, hands trembling, heart racing, as I poured out everything I kept bottled up inside. The guilt, the pain, and the change within me. I hit send and immediately felt the weight of it dissipate into the air, my breath catching in my throat like a child learning to swim. Days slipped by, a mix of anxiety and anticipation weaving through me. Whenever my phone buzzed, I would jump, hoping it would be her name lighting up the screen. On more than one occasion, I braced myself to read the words that might either set me free or pull me back into the depths of regret. Instead, I found myself lost in a world of new friendships, a life burgeoning with possibilities. Jenna became my confidant, my cheerleader, as I shared the green shoots of hope sprouting from my decisions. Then, one serene afternoon, while lounging on the grass beneath the sprawling oak tree on campus, the familiar sound of that old notification echoed in my ears. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers, heart throbbing like a drum, only to find a message from an unexpected source, Lily. The straightforward sentence stared back at me, stark and unadorned. I've been thinking about what happened. It was the beginning of a long exchange, where we found ourselves discussing not just what had once transpired, but where we stood now, worlds apart yet yearning for connection. As we shared our journeys, I felt the jagged edges inside slowly smooth out. Lily had found her way through the labyrinth of pain, and in her newfound strength, she offered me a chance at redemption, not just for my sake, but for both of us. And that's when I realized that healing is not just an individual journey, it weaves itself through others' lives too, creating a vast tapestry of resilience and hope. As we forged a new beginning, I learned that true friendship often thrives not in the absence of mistakes but in our ability to acknowledge them, grow from them, and extend our hands toward one another, however shattered the past may be. I can only hope that this is just the start of a long journey of mending hearts, for both of us, complicated, messy, and beautifully raw, much like the most riveting stories worth telling. And as I find solace in this new chapter, I am reminded that even the deepest scars can blend into stronger foundations, and perhaps, in time, I'll be able to embrace the beautiful complexity of connection once again. I'll keep updating this little journey, weaving new stories alongside those that shaped me, and perhaps one day, it will all come full circle, offering a glimpse into a friendship reborn from the ashes of betrayal and regret. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself drifting into a routine that felt solid yet flexible, like the gentle currents of a river shaping the land around it. I immersed myself in volunteering at a local community center, a place bustling with laughter and warmth, where kindness was both given and received. This became my sanctuary, where stories were shared among strangers sprouting into friendships over the shared experiences of helping others. I would sit with the children, listening to their imaginative tales, allowing their innocence to remind me of the person I once was before my teenage years turned tumultuous. I carved out a space where I could connect without the weight of my past suffocating me, learning to celebrate both small victories and large defeats, forging a new identity step by step. And yet, Lily's shadow was never too far away. While I thrived on the newfound ability to empathize and support, I often thought of the moments we had shared, late-night whispers, secrets exchanged, the laughter echoing through the halls of our high school. I recalled the way our friendship felt so resilient then, until it crumbled under the weight of my choices. Each thought of her sparked a war within. Guilt and regret battled with the hope that maybe, one day, I'd find the strength to reach out. But I was haunted, too, haunted by shadows of the girl I had once betrayed, wondering if our connection could ever survive the wounds I'd inflicted. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, teetering back and forth, battling the wave of fear that swelled with each passing day. One afternoon, while preparing art supplies for a mural project at the center, I overheard a couple of volunteers discussing a local high school reunion that was coming up. They talked about it in excited tones, reminiscing about old crushes and the infamous cafeteria food. An unexpected thrill coursed through me at the mention of school. The memories rushed back involuntarily: Lily's laughter, her teasing banter, the way she made even the dullest days shine. That familiar tug on my heart ignited a fire of longing I thought had dulled with time. Perhaps this reunion could be my opportunity to confront my past. The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. It was a chance, an opening to reconcile, to show her that I had changed, that I was not the person who had hurt her. As I debated this within my mind, I resolved to attend, my heart pounding with the weight of what lay ahead. When the evening of the reunion finally arrived, I stood before the mirror, nervously adjusting my hair as if that would mask the turmoil bubbling under the surface. I chose a simple yet elegant dress, not wanting to draw too much attention, but inside I felt like a storm was brewing. I arrived early, clutching my phone with trembling hands, hoping that maybe I wouldn't run into her, perhaps I could just blend into the background. Yet, that was not my destiny. The room filled with familiar faces, laughter, and the comforting scent of nostalgia wafting through. It wasn't long before I spotted her across the room. Lily hadn't changed at all, her essence remained intact, as vibrant as the joking spirit I remembered. My heart raced, part of me wanting to flee, but another part anchoring me in place. I took a deep breath and steadied myself, concluding that there would be no healing without facing the wounds head on. As she caught my eye, it felt like time slowed, and memories flooded back, intoxicating me with the weight of our shared history. The room faded into a dull hum as I approached her, my heart a cacophony of beats echoing uncertainty. When she turned, our eyes locked, and in that moment, I couldn't decipher her expression: surprise, maybe even anger, but hidden within was a flicker of curiosity. I swallowed hard, words forming and collapsing in my throat like waves crashing against a rocky shore. "Hey, Lily," I started, my voice trembling ever so slightly. "It's been a long time." The silence stretched like a taut rope between us, filled with so many unspoken sentiments. Her smile faltered and faded, replaced by a cautious expression. "Yeah, it really has." The weight of what I had done lay between us like an uninvited guest, dimming the brightness of the occasion. I took a step closer, fueled by every ounce of regret I had harbored. "I'm really sorry for what happened. I've spent a lot of time thinking about our friendship and how I hurt you. I can't change the past, but I'm hoping maybe we can talk?" There was a long pause, and in that moment, I felt a mix of hope and despair wash over me. My heart hammered against my ribcage as I watched the emotions play across her face: confusion, pain, and perhaps flickers of understanding. "I don't know if talking will help," she replied softly, her voice a fragile thread woven with the weight of our shared history. "I understand," I said, clasping my hands in front of me, an unconscious gesture of vulnerability. "But I need you to know that I've changed. I know that my choices hurt you in ways I can't fix, but I want to do better. I want to learn to be the friend you deserved." With that, I felt a small shift, like the first glimmers of dawn breaking through a long, dark night. Slowly, her expression softened, revealing a hint of the warm-hearted girl I'd once shared secrets with. "Maybe we can try," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, igniting a spark of hope within me. For the rest of the evening, we spoke about our lives, our journeys, the lessons we had learned, and the shadows we still faced. What once felt like an insurmountable mountain to climb now unfolded as a path strewn with possibilities. As the night wore on, I realized that though we would never erase the past, we could take steps forward together, perhaps allowing our friendship to evolve and heal. By the time I left, it wasn't just a reunion I attended, it was a catharsis, a tangible step toward reconciliation. As I lay in bed that night, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I knew this journey wouldn't be easy. The scars of betrayal were etched deeply in both of us, and while time might not heal everything, I hoped it would, at the very least, allow us to stitch the pieces back together, each encounter strengthening the fragile threads of our renewed bond. I nestled under my covers, letting the warmth wash over me, and closed my eyes, dreaming of a friendship reborn, rekindled amidst the rich tapestry of our shared stories. As I drifted off, I remembered my silent vow, to treat others with kindness, to acknowledge my past mistakes, and to never lose sight of the power of connection, even when it felt far out of reach. Every Friday, as twilight began to drape its velvet shadow over my town, I found myself slipping into an abandoned version of our world, a realm I had only begun to understand. My name is Sarah, and at 32, I was navigating the messy waters of adulthood with the grace of a swan on ice. I had a job I loved as a graphic designer, a small but cozy apartment, and a close-knit group of friends who would gather over wine and laughter every weekend. Yet beneath the surface of my seemingly idyllic life simmered a strange phenomenon. Every Friday, with the onset of night, I stumbled into this alternate reality where everything felt both eerily familiar and paradoxically different. It started innocuously enough, just the usual urge to take a solitary walk to clear my mind after a hectic week. One evening, I meandered through the park, where the scent of damp earth filled the air and streetlights flickered like stars awakening, when I felt a sudden chill dance along my spine. That was the moment everything changed, as I found myself staring down an alleyway I had never noticed before. The air grew thick and heavy as I stepped inside, and what unfolded felt like a scene from a long-forgotten dream. It was a fractured mirror of our world. Skyscrapers leaned unnaturally, their windows shattered, and the streets were littered with remnants of a bustling life that once thrived. The silence was almost deafening, punctuated only by a soft whisper of wind that seemed to carry the echoes of laughter and conversations long lost. Each week, I wandered deeper, meeting shadows that mirrored my own life, shapes of people I recognized but were stuck in time. There was Jason, my ex-boyfriend, sitting forlornly on a park bench with an unreadable expression, and my childhood friend Lily, trapped in a loop of tying her shoelaces, eyes glazed and unseeing. It was agonizingly beautiful and heartbreakingly tragic all at once. Even though a part of me wanted to shake them awake, to remind them they were part of a world that moved forward, I felt an inexplicable bond with them, a sense of shared longing for what had been lost. Every encounter brought more questions than answers, and a knot of guilt lodged itself in my chest. Was I abandoning these versions of my friends? I found comfort in the stillness they provided, a stark contrast to the chaos of life outside this broken reality, yet it was a bittersweet solace. The emotions tangled within me, weaving a fabric of unresolved feelings I had yet to confront. Driven by a mix of curiosity and a need for closure, I questioned my own reality. Was I merely a spectator in this parallel existence, or had I become an unwilling participant in the decay of what used to be? After weeks of wandering, something extraordinary happened. One Friday, as the sun dipped below the horizon, swallowing the remnants of daylight, I found myself holding the hand of past Sarah, a version of me caught in a moment of vulnerability, crying over the remnants of lost dreams. In that moment, I realized she wasn't merely a reflection, she was a part of me, and her pain was my pain, an echo of my fears and regrets. I squeezed her hand tight, and a warmth surged between us, an understanding that we were allowed to feel all of it, the joy, the sorrow, the unfinished stories. I took a breath, exhaling the weight of expectations, and whispered promises of resilience, coaxing her to step into the light of possibility. When the dawn broke, pulling me back to my own world, I carried that moment with me. I understood now what this strange journey had been about. It wasn't just about fleeing into shadows but confronting what lay within. The following Fridays came and went, and with them, I chose to embrace both the hazy memories and the bright future waiting for me. I sought therapy, started journaling again, and reached out to the people I had neglected, rebuilding those connections with renewed vigor and honesty. In reflection, every weekend became an opportunity to grow, to heal, and to evolve. I never saw that abandoned world again, but perhaps it existed in the whispers of my mind, urging me to confront the echoes I had long kept at bay. It was strange but liberating. There was no need to return to a world that was never mine to mend. Life persisted, with its beautiful messiness, and I was ready to embrace it all anew. Update: a few months later, after harnessing my newfound sense of hope and strength, I invited my friends over for a gathering. I shared my experiences with them, how fear and joy intertwined in our lives, how we each carried shadows of past selves within us. To my surprise, they opened up too, revealing their struggles, the dreams that slipped away, the relationships that faded. We laughed and cried together, transforming what could have been an ordinary evening into something profoundly beautiful. In that moment, I realized that while my journeys into the abandoned world were over, the true exploration of life had only just begun. The warmth of our shared stories lingered in the air long after my friends left that evening, their laughter echoing in the silent corners of my home like a comforting blanket. I sat among the remnants of our gathering, the empty glasses, the discarded pizza boxes, the faint smell of burnt candle wax, and let the realization of our newfound connection wash over me. It struck me how easy it was to get lost in the grind of everyday life, focusing on the mundane tasks and brushing aside our emotional landscapes as if they were clutter. But that night, we had revealed our vulnerabilities. We peeled back the layers we wore for the world, showing glimpses of the pain and passion that simmered beneath. It was a cathartic release for all of us, a pact to keep our hearts open, no matter how scarred they may have been. As the days went by, I found myself seeking the presence of my friends more often, each gathering becoming a ritual of sorts, small fires of connection. Against the chill of life's uncertainties. We shared coffee before work, late-night walks under stars that appeared more vivid than ever, and even those awkward moments of silence that spoke volumes about our growing trust. The abandoned world where I once escaped felt increasingly distant, a fading echo of solitude in contrast to the vibrant tapestry we were weaving together. Yet, sometimes, an unfamiliar shadow would brush against my thoughts, a faint reminder of the solitude I once found comforting. One Friday night, as I prepared for another gathering, the air thick with anticipation, I glanced out of my window and spotted a figure in the distance. An overwhelming sense of déjà vu washed over me. I recognized the silhouette from my previous encounters within that parallel realm. It stood still amidst the swirling wind, a tangible piece of my past resurrected in the real world, its presence unsettling yet oddly magnetic. My heart began to race with a mixture of fear and disquiet. Had my journeys truly ended, or did the abandoned world still seep into my reality? I pushed the thought aside and joined my friends, our conversations flowing like an unbroken river, laughter bubbling through the thick evening air, but the figure lurked in the corner of my mind, demanding attention. It became an unwelcome guest at our feast, lingering there, causing my smile to falter and my laughter to sound hollow at times. As the night carried on and my friends' stories unfurled, I fought to focus, yet every time I glanced outside, there it was, steadfast and unyielding. That following night, sleep evaded me like a wary wild animal, and I found myself staring out into the dark. Something compelled me, an insatiable thirst to confront whatever ghost of my past was anchored in the shadows. I slipped out of my house, leaving behind the warmth of camaraderie, unsettling excitement coursing through me. As I approached the figure, I felt a magnetic pull drawing me closer. Despite the nagging fear that crept into my thoughts, the urgency to uncover the truth wrapped around me like a scarf on a cold winter night. When I finally stood before it, the figure morphed into an ethereal version of myself, an echo from the abandoned world, draped in garments that seemed woven from air and despair. "You left me behind," it whispered, the voice unfamiliar yet intimately familiar, echoing the unresolved parts of my spirit. The words dug deep, but instead of fear, a wave of recognition washed over me. "I didn't leave you, I transformed," I replied, my voice steady despite the shivering uncertainty in my heart. We stood there, two halves of the same story, the weight of everything unspoken suspended in the air like a thick fog. "You can't run from what you've been," the phantom self cautioned, "but you can accept it." The truth nestled within me at that moment. No longer was I that figure trapped in desolation. I understood now that both aspects of myself were valid, not separate but interconnected, each yearning for recognition and acceptance. With a newfound resolve, I stepped forward, embracing the other me, feeling the cold slip away and warmth fill the air between us. "I understand you," I murmured, "and I won't forget you." It had all led to this nexus, this moment of convergence of past and present. The figure shimmered before me and gradually began to dissolve like mist at dawn. In that transformative moment, I realized that our struggles didn't define us but rather enriched our existence. They interwove into the fabric of who we were and who we were becoming. When I returned home, I sensed a profound stillness around me. I slid back into bed, cradled by the quiet, the echoes of our gathering still mingling with my thoughts, now clearer and brighter. Each relationship, each struggle, each laugh shared had not just been an escape from the abandoned world but a pilgrimage toward wholeness and acceptance. As I drifted off to sleep, I understood that my journey had only just begun, the threads of connection promising the warmth of love, hope, and understanding in a world both expansive and beautifully intimate. Update: a week later, I received an unexpected message from one of my friends, who revealed that after our last gathering, they had decided to pursue a passion they had long abandoned. Through our conversations, they realized how much they had been missing out on by burying their dreams. They were taking steps to reclaim their life, inspired by that evening's vulnerability. I felt an overwhelming tide of gratitude, knowing that the parallels of our lives would continue to entwine in unexpected ways, far beyond what I had initially imagined. Each Friday now carried a promise, a chance to expand our worlds together, simultaneously exploring the depths of our pasts while forging paths into a brighter future. As the weeks passed, our Friday gatherings became something I eagerly awaited, a soft beacon amid the tumult of everyday life. Each meeting transformed into a safe harbor where we could shed our masks, nurturing a bond that felt both fragile and resilient at the same time. We shared stories of progress and setbacks, each tale echoing with laughter or laced with the bittersweet recognition of our past regrets. I watched my friends dive headfirst into their passions. Clara picked up painting again, her once dormant creativity swirling back to life in vibrant hues, while Jake, a former musician, dusted off his guitar, the strings quivering in anticipation as he strummed melodies that had long been silenced. On one damp Friday evening, as a gentle rain tapped on the windows, we gathered in my living room, sipping tea and wrapped in the warmth of our camaraderie. The air was thick with shared ambitions and relentless hopes, and as the rain pattered softly against the glass, Clara stood up, her hands shaking slightly as she held a newly completed painting.
I painted this for all of you, she announced, her voice
vulnerable yet steady. We turned our attention, and I felt breathless as the canvas came into view, alive with swirling colors that seemed to dance in harmony. In the center of the piece stood a radiant sun, the golden rays extending outward, touching smaller images woven into the fabric of the painting, notes from a musical score, vibrant flowers in an untamed garden, and silhouetted figures embracing beneath the sky. Each element echoed our shared stories, bringing the impossible together in a dazzling display of possibility. My heart swelled as Clara shared the inspiration behind her painting, revealing it to be a tribute to our newfound resolve, a reminder that life, much like her art, was a blend of light and shadow. Each story, each contribution, tied into the greater tapestry of who we were becoming, a poignant reflection of our intertwined journey. But underneath the laughter and paint, there lurked an unspoken undercurrent. I could feel it creeping into our gatherings like the fog that sometimes settled in the valley, a lingering fear that perhaps this sense of rebirth was all too fragile, that the momentum we'd built might slip through our fingers like grains of sand. So, that night, as we wrapped up our discussions and prepared to bid each other farewell amid hugs and promises to return, I decided to let my anxious thoughts spill out. What if this all goes away? I asked, the weight of apprehension evident in my voice. What if we lose this spark? Silence enveloped the room, a collective breath held tight, until Jake broke it, his expression earnest. But what if we don't? What if we just make it a part of our lives, weave it into everything we do? It's worth the risk, isn't it? His words resonated within me, filling the space with an understanding that while the fear of change was a valid one, the courage to embrace it was something we all shared now. Our paths would not always be straight, and we would face obstacles ahead, but we had each other, the threads of our stories now woven together in ways that felt indelible. In the weeks that followed, we established a routine, a cycle of inspiration that pushed us beyond mere discussion. Clara organized a mini art show displaying her work inspired by our gatherings, and Jake penned lyrics for a song that captured the emotional essence of our shared journey. I struggled, too, dipping my toes into writing for the first time, words spilling onto the page as I explored the shadows I once thought were too dark to face. We became a collective of dreams, a sounding board for support, where failure became a learning tool rather than a conclusion. Yet, each Friday, there was still the nagging thought in the back of my mind, would this last? What would happen when life interjected and we found ourselves distanced again? One night, amid songs and artwork, Clara shared something that shook the very core of my worry. She reminded us that our relationships, those threads that connected us, might stretch, but they would never break. The vulnerability we had forged would allow our paths to remain intertwined, even during hard times. I pondered her words deeply as the weeks rolled by, the thoughts spinning like a top in my mind as I observed the changes in all of us. While life wasn't linear, perhaps the connections we built could guide us through its winding paths. Then, one crisp evening, as the trees outside began to shed their leaves in a vivid mosaic of color, so too did we shed our old selves, admitting the depth of our fears and joys. With every shared meal, every laugh, and the tears that sometimes fell freely, we started to understand that vulnerability was not a weakness but a wellspring of strength. By trusting each other with our truths, we created an unassailable support network, each of us vowing to cling tightly to the hope that had begun to unfurl within. As autumn painted our town in shades of rust and gold, I no longer feared that the world we had built would crumble. Instead, I welcomed it with an open heart, understanding that the beauty of our bond lay not just in what we shared, but in the promise of becoming, of growing and changing together. As I looked around our circle, illuminated by the warm glow of soft candlelight, I felt a calmness settle over me. The Fridays were no longer a way to escape into the past, They had grown into a celebration of our present and the radiant future we were all learning to embrace. And as I let out a soft breath, the words of our lives merging into one symphony of resilience echoed in my mind. This was only the beginning. Update, as a final note, I want to share something unexpected that emerged as we continued this journey together. Jake approached me last Friday, excitement shimmering in his eyes, and revealed that he had been writing pieces not just for himself, but for a new collaboration. He mentioned that he was planning to form a band, pulling Claire and me into the mix. The idea of sharing our stories through music and art on an even larger stage frightened me, but looking at the smiles of Clara and Jake ignited something within me, a spark of possibility. So here we are, a week later. I've agreed to join them, taking on the challenge of writing lyrics alongside Jake. The fear remains, but now, more than ever, I recognize the importance of stepping out of my comfort zone. I am ready to explore life's mysteries, both on that canvas and in those melodies. I breathe a little deeper as I consider what lies ahead. Whatever it may be, I know it will be an adventure worth sharing, as we continue to shape our own beautiful, abandoned world together. When I received the news that my older sister, Claire, had to move back in with our parents, something deep inside me told me that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't fathom at the moment. I'm Emma, the youngest of three, and my relationship with Claire has always been a rocky one. Sure, we had shared laughter and tears growing up, but there was something about her larger-than-life persona that often overshadowed my quieter, more reserved disposition. I had built a life for myself, a snug little apartment in the heart of the city with a decent job that allowed me to pay my bills while still enjoying a few luxuries here and there. So when my parents called with concern edging their voices, explaining that Claire had been laid off and needed a place to stay temporarily, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. They explained how Claire would contribute financially to the household, which seemed reasonable on the surface, but as the weeks passed, it became disappointingly clear that this was not going to be a temporary arrangement. The first indication of the shift came one afternoon when I casually visited my parents. Walking through the familiar doorway, I was immediately engulfed in a whirl of mismatched furniture and the uniquely cluttered chaos of their living room. It felt different now. Claire had rearranged the space, filling it with scattered boxes, remnants of her previous life. She greeted me with the same beaming smile, but I could sense an underlying tension, a whisper of irritation hanging in the air like an uninvited guest. We exchanged pleasantries that felt stilted and awkward, and it quickly became apparent that her presence was overshadowing mine. It didn't take long for her to bring up the topic of finances, how my parents were struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments while trying to help her get back on her feet. It was a tough conversation that had me feeling cornered, like they expected me to take action. I found myself drowning in guilt, torn between helping my family and maintaining my own sense of independence. They mentioned how my contribution to the mortgage would ease their burdens and allow Claire more time to get a new job, framing it as a family obligation that I simply couldn't escape. After all, right? Family sticks together. The idea of throwing money their way felt like a no-brainer, but I couldn't help but wonder if Claire would truly be grateful or if she would instead see it as another opportunity to lean on me while I struggled to maintain my budding career. I mulled over it for days, and with each passing moment, the thought of participating in this financial strain more than I had anticipated grew heavier. It wasn't just my money at stake, it was my mental space, my comfort, and my sense of security that was being tested. As the weeks turned to months, the stress festered. A particularly low evening found me swirling through the darkness of my mind, battling with the anxiety of homeownership versus my sense of familial duty. Claire continued to thrive in the chaotic comfort of our parents' home, her laughter echoing through the walls while I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, feeling the distance grow. I pondered my worth in our family dynamic and felt torn between my urge to support them and my instinct to protect my own growing future. When confrontation finally loomed, it exploded into one dramatic night over a family dinner where we sat across the table, Claire alight with engaging stories from her day while I quietly picked at the cold pasta on my plate. In a moment of frustration, I voiced my feelings about not wanting to pay the mortgage. The air turned electric, and for the first time, Claire's mask slipped slightly, revealing a flicker of genuine indignation. "It's not just my responsibility," I asserted, a shaky confidence underlined by the crack in my voice. She was taken aback, and for a moment, I wondered if I had finally clarified my stance, but instead, all hell broke loose. I witnessed an explosion of accusations hurled between Claire and me, sharp words clattering like glass breaking. My parents, caught in the crossfire, tried to mediate, but I felt less like a daughter and more like a burden. Heat rose in my chest as Claire accused me of selfishness, while I voiced my feelings of unappreciation and betrayal. It was a raw, painful argument, and when it finally fizzled out, I couldn't shake off the suffocating realization that I wasn't sure if I could ever go back to the way things were, or if I wanted to. I excused myself that night, feeling more isolated than ever, and upon returning to my apartment, I fell into a deep, restless sleep, punctuated with dreams of family betrayals and financial obligations that loomed over me like dark clouds. Days blended into weeks until I finally decided to distance myself from the toxic cycle of guilt and anger. I started to think critically about my own wants and needs. I drafted a letter to my parents, outlining my decision not to contribute to the mortgage, hoping it would provide clarity for all of us. It was written with a tense love, filled with the emotional depth of someone who desperately wanted to reconnect but felt trapped by the dynamic set years ago. I explained that I loved them all dearly, but I could no longer sacrifice my own stability for their peace. The letters found their way to my parents, and although the response wasn't immediately warm, my parents at least acknowledged my courage to stand my ground. Claire, however, took it harder than I expected. Her phone call that followed was rife with anger and misunderstanding, yet I felt something shift. Instead of clashing, I allowed her to express herself while I calmly responded, and to my surprise, her tone softened. Weeks turned to months. Though our relationship didn't magically mend, it did begin to evolve towards something more honest. Claire ultimately found a new job that stabilized her income, and while it took time, we began to rebuild the bridge our family needed. I learned that sometimes, a stand for myself did not stem from selfishness but from a place of deep self-respect. That unanticipated reflection taught me the art of balance, how love can coexist with boundaries. And while the discussion of finances still hung in the air like a specter, our family unit began to resonate with a different tone, a more supportive, understanding one. I shared this story with a friend as we laughed about the ridiculousness of our familial dynamics. And the strangest thing happened. Claire popped into my thoughts, reminding me that, sometimes, the way you navigate conflict can redefine relationships, even if it feels contentious at first. As I lay in bed that night, the shadows of previous conflicts melted into the hush of my room, and I reveled in the soft glow of acceptance I felt. Maybe, in facing the storm together, we had each become stronger, more resilient. I would continue to carve my own path and embrace the complexity of love with boundaries, wrapped in the possibility of new beginnings and stronger ties. So, was I the asshole? Maybe, for a moment, but that moment helped safeguard my heart and nurture a family connection that was worth every ounce of struggle. As days turned into weeks, the dynamics at home shifted like the ebb and flow of the ocean tides, and I could feel the undertow of change swirling around me. My sister's presence had transformed the atmosphere. The house was no longer just a shell echoing with silent resentments and unspoken words but was now filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and the occasional argument over whose turn it was to take out the trash. I caught myself glancing at her when I thought she wasn't watching, noticing the way she'd laugh at her own silly jokes or how her eyes would shimmer when she spoke about her work. I felt a flicker of warmth, the kind I hadn't allowed myself to embrace in years. I wondered if this was the unfamiliar sound of healing, an orchestra assembling after decades of discordant notes, each of us tentatively racing our instruments to join the symphony. Yet, beneath this newly woven tapestry lay a knot of tension that refused to loosen. The impending reality of our parents' financial situation loomed over us like dark clouds on the horizon. They had worked tirelessly to keep a roof over our heads, sacrificing much for a sense of security that now seemed delicate. I couldn't shake off the guilt swirling in my gut, an insistent reminder that my own independence had inadvertently contributed to the distance growing between my family and our responsibilities. We were all learning to navigate these choppy waters together, bound by a shared sense of duty, but the question echoed in my mind, was I responsible for saving us from drowning? One crisp autumn evening, as the sun began to dip below the trees, painting the sky in rich oranges and purples, I took a walk to gather my thoughts. I needed clarity. I found myself wandering to the coffee shop down the street, a cozy little place filled with the aroma of freshly brewed beans and the soft hum of conversations that somehow made my worries feel lighter. As I sipped my cappuccino, I overheard a couple discussing their struggles with family dynamics, and it struck me how universal our experiences were. That was when I realized I wasn't alone, that this shared pain, this negotiation of love and obligation, resonated beyond the walls of our family. When I returned home, a darkness was hanging in the air. My parents had decided to have the talk about their mortgage again. As they gathered us around the dining room table, I could see the worry etched into their faces, lines deepening like cracks in a porcelain vase, beautiful but fragile. They explained how the financial burden had grown heavier since my sister had moved in, how they had hoped the extra help would ease their situation, but instead it felt like an anchor dragging us all down. I could feel my heart racing, the old defenses rising up like walls starting to thicken around me again. I didn't want to fight, I wanted to connect, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. Finally, I spoke up, my voice steady but soft. What if we came together to plan this out? I want to help. The room fell silent, each of us in our thoughts, the tension a thick, almost tangible fog. My sister's eyes lit up, and for a moment, the lightness from the coffee shop danced back into the room. We frantically brainstormed ideas, pooling resources like a patchwork quilt, slowly stitching together something new. It was in that moment that I felt a compelling shift, a sturdy thread, woven through the fabric of our relationships, an undeniable connection that reminded us we were all part of the same tapestry. As the weeks passed, we fine-tuned our household budget, and while some days were harder than others, we managed to claw back the control that had slipped from our fingers. The burden didn't evaporate, but sharing it made it bearable. The night before my parents were set to meet with their mortgage lender, I found myself curled up with my sister on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us while we binge-watched our favorite show. The laughter flowed between us, and for the first time in so long, I felt free, unconfined by our past but tethered to something new and beautiful. When morning came, as the birds chirped their daily greetings, I caught an early glimpse of my parents, standing tall against the dawn, ready to face the day. They seemed more resolute, the worry less visible as they exchanged quiet words. I knew we had moved past the point of being the assholes. We hadn't just weathered the storm, we had learned to dance in the rain, to let the drops wash away our fears, and we emerged, messy, imperfect, but undeniably united. Looking back, I realized that my initial reluctance to pay the mortgage had stemmed from a place of self-preservation and misunderstanding, but it quietly evolved into an opportunity for growth. In acknowledging my boundaries, I learned the importance of balance and the strength of family, and that love isn't just about sacrifice, it's about sharing, supporting, and ultimately embracing the complex layers that knit us together. So, was I the asshole? Not anymore. Just a person learning to navigate the beautiful chaos of family ties, tangled yet stronger for the journey we shared. As for an update, life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. A couple of months later, my parents expressed their gratitude, our collective efforts had eased their burden, and they even started discussing investments in their favorite hobbies again. My sister and I grew closer, sharing our lives, guiding one another, and at times, still butting heads. Yet, each argument only served as an avenue for growth, a chapter added to our story. I think, in the quiet moments of reflection, that's the beauty of family. It's messy, sometimes frustrating, but amidst all that chaos, we often find our way back to each other. And really, isn't that what matters most? As I settled into this new rhythm of life, I noticed how the air felt different in our home. It was lighter, infused with the sense of camaraderie that had blossomed between my sister and me. On weekends, our kitchen filled with the sense of baking bread and simmering sauces, an orchestra of sound as we attempted new recipes together. But it wasn't all flour and laughter, the undercurrents of tension could still surface. I remember one particularly rainy Saturday afternoon when the sky mirrored our mood. I had returned home after a long week of work, exhausted and craving solitude. Instead, I found my sister hosting an impromptu gathering of her friends. The din of youthful laughter and music pulsed through the house, and I felt my heart thrum uneasily in my chest. I was torn between the discomfort of intrusion and the warmth of familial support in their laughter, which echoed off the walls like constant reminders of choices I didn't quite understand. Concealed within the whirlwind of my thoughts was the nagging feeling that the strides we had made had somehow become entangled with my sister's demands. As the chaos of her life spilled into our shared space, I found myself feeling suffocated by the very familial bond I had craved. When I finally mustered the courage to address it, my sister, caught off guard, was defensive. "You used to be so welcoming," she challenged, and I could sense the shadows of our past struggles creeping in. Inherently, this was a moment of vulnerability for both of us, and as the silence hung heavy before me, I realized it wasn't just about me needing space, it was also about her needing to assert her independence in this shared space. After what felt like an eternity of misunderstanding, we sat down, nursing cups of tea, the clamor of her friends fading into the background. I spoke my truth, gentle yet firm. "I love having you here, but I need a little room to breathe sometimes." I watched as her expression softened, the realization dawning on her like the morning sun breaking through the clouds. "I get it," she finally said, her voice laced with empathy. "I'm still figuring this out too." From there, we laid the groundwork for a new kind of understanding, one that delicately balanced my need for tranquility with her vibrant, chaotic energy. We established times for her gatherings, leaving pockets of silence for both introspection and connection. As months slipped by like the autumn leaves falling gently from the trees outside, our family dynamic eased into a rhythm that felt right. With the festive season approaching, my parents decided to host a holiday dinner, hoping to gather everyone, both a celebration of the many transformations we had weathered and a nod to the community we had formed. We'd always traded off holidays with each other, but this year felt different. It pulsed with undercurrents of genuine appreciation. As the table filled with food and laughter, I observed the way my sister's friends mingled effortlessly with our family, an intertwined tapestry of relationships. Each conversation brought forth stories, inherited laughter, the kind born from shared histories and new experiences alike. But amidst the joy, I saw the familiar glint of tension creeping into the room as my parents expressed worry over their lingering mortgage, a detail I had hoped to keep under wraps. My sister, well-intentioned yet impulsive, enthusiastically shared ideas for a crowdfunding initiative to help with expenses. The way my parents' glimmers with confused hesitation only added weight to the conversation. I felt the room pulse with apprehension as layers of unspoken concern layered themselves upon my heart. Stepping in, I breathed deeply, drawing from the wisdom that had built itself over months of navigating rough waters together. "Let's talk this through as a family," I suggested, knowing we could find common ground. We always had. The discussion that followed was cathartic and revealing, each family member presenting their views, fears woven seamlessly into a tapestry of resolution. Finally, we reached an understanding that eased all our hearts, an agreement to pool resources into a family fund that would alleviate some stress while allowing my parents to invest in their passions. It opened the door to a more significant discussion about finances, futures, and the shared desire to support one another. Sitting around that holiday table, the glows of fairy lights expertly littering the room flickered, mirroring the warmth in our hearts. I understood, in that moment, reassurance and growth can coexist, just as laughter and arguments can. Our journey had only begun to blossom, intricate and beautiful, revealing itself as we paid attention and cared for one another, an ever-evolving chapter filled with love. It was a moment of profound truth for me. Maybe, in allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and honest, in navigating the messy underbelly of family life, we had built something sturdier than any foundation of separate lives. We had stitched a quilt of resilience, forever learning, forever growing, bound not by blood, but by our commitment to each other. I always thought I had a handle on my life, at least until that day in late October when I met Simon. My friends had introduced me to this charming, somewhat eccentric guy during a party at a local bar, and at first, I found his quirks pretty endearing. He had this way of dominating every conversation, offering insights that oscillated between profound and downright weird. It was a smaller gathering, just a handful of us nursing drinks and sharing stories, and when Simon spoke, everyone leaned in. Despite his tendency to ramble about conspiracy theories and existential thoughts, there was something magnetic about him that held my attention. Still, as the night wore on, I sensed a sort of edge to him, a flicker of something unsettling. Not long after that first meeting, we found ourselves reunited at a mutual friend's Halloween party. This time it felt different. I was enveloped by a growing unease as I watched him navigate around the room. His laughter came easily, but I noticed he seemed to concentrate a little too hard on the people he interacted with, as if he were dissecting them instead of simply chatting. He led conversations in odd directions, asking pointed questions that made others uncomfortable, often making observations that seemed oddly personal, despite their casual nature. "You know, you really shouldn't be drinking so much on an empty stomach," he quipped to Jenna, who had been sipping her fifth cocktail. It wasn't just concern, it felt like scrutiny. Over the weeks, my initial curiosity morphed into apprehension. I joked with friends that I was convinced Simon was a spy gathering intel on our little group, but deep down, I had a nagging fear that there was more to him than met the eye. One evening, I found myself sharing a quiet drink with Simon. I thought we were just having an innocent chat, but he began probing deeper, asking about my childhood. It didn't feel innocent at all. He asked about my fears and insecurities as if he were keeping score. Sitting there, I felt vulnerable, like he had unearthed parts of my soul I wasn't ready to share. Days went by, and I noticed little oddities that further twisted the discomfort into an unsettling kind of tension. I discovered he seemed to know far too much about me, and it terrified me how he could recall seemingly trivial details from conversations. It was like I had been unknowingly hypnotized by his charisma or even manipulated. I found myself questioning every interaction, waking up in the middle of the night worrying if I was being watched, and the paranoia finally culminated when I realized someone was outside my apartment late one night. I caught a glimpse of a figure in my peripheral vision, a fleeting shadow that vanished as I turned to confront it. My heart raced, and dread washed over me because that feeling was all too familiar, like a scene from a horror story. My fears bubbled over, and I reached out to my closest friend, Mia. Sitting on her couch, clutching a mug of tea, I exposed my thoughts, spilling out the strange occurrences and Simon's unnerving behavior. She listened patiently before suggesting I confront Simon about how I felt, an idea that sent shivers through me. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood that I couldn't let this anxiety fester. So, I gathered my courage and arranged to meet Simon at a cafe across town, a small place he loved downtown with its mismatched furniture and the smell of freshly baked pastries. It created a stark contrast to the growing storm inside me. When I walked into the cafe, I felt every ounce of anxiety twisting in my stomach. Upon seeing Simon, sitting casually, a faint smile played on his lips. I couldn't help but subconsciously mirror it, yet my fingers were ice cold. I dove straight in, voicing my concerns, trying to keep my tone calm as I explained how his intense interest in my life was making me uncomfortable. As I spoke, I watched his expression shift from amusement to a cold, calculated seriousness. He leaned closer, almost whispering, "You think I'm watching you? But I've merely been observing the fascinating patterns in your behavior." That cryptic comment sent a chill down my spine, and I took an involuntary step back. My mind raced as I stumbled to find words, but he continued. "People are so predictable, you see. We're all part of a grander experiment, a social behavior study that I've taken an interest in. Each of you is a case study that could unveil deeper truths about our existence." His confidence was disorienting, and I became acutely aware of the other patrons around us, observing me as if I were a persona in one of his twisted tales. I wanted to laugh it off, to walk away, but the fear was palpable. I excused myself, stepping outside into the brisk autumn air, letting the humidity of our conversation escape with every breath. Somehow, I managed to reach my car in a daze and drove straight to Mia's. I didn't sleep well that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing through the possibilities of what Simon might do next or if he had already manipulated others in similar ways. Just as I felt the weariness seep into my bones, the phone buzzed, an unknown number, but I picked up anyway. "I told you," Simon said, his voice seeping through the receiver with an unyielding calm that made bile rise in my throat. "You're part of the experiment now. Don't worry, you're doing beautifully." I hung up, feeling the life drain from my body. I realized I had to get as far away from Simon as possible, cutting ties with anyone connected to him. I spent a weekend isolating myself, gathering strength, and when Monday rolled around, I put my plan into action. I contacted some of our mutual friends, explained my concerns, and they were surprisingly receptive. It turns out, many felt the same instinctual discomfort around Simon, but no one had voiced it aloud, fearing judgment or ridicule. As we shared experiences, it became clear that Simon wasn't just another quirky guy, he had been a creeping dread in our midst. Eventually, we decided to cut him out of our lives collectively, more empowered and relieved than terrified. Months later, as winter neared, I sat at home one evening, buried in a book, when another unexpected but familiar buzz jolted me. It was Mia, a shared article on a local Reddit thread called "What's the creepiest display of intelligence you've seen by another human?" The title alone made all our previous discussions flood back. In the comments, people recounted their unsettling run-ins with individuals who excelled in manipulation and mind games, a rush of disquiet that reminded me of Simon. As I read through the frightening tales, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him since we distanced ourselves. I found solace in the boundaries I had created and the collective strength of those around me. For the first time in months, I managed to smile, grateful that while some minds can turn dark, together we could harness our vigilance and illuminate the edges of our lives. Life was still unpredictable and frightening at times, but I knew with the right people around me, I could face the shadows lurking in the corners. The house felt lighter that evening as I reflected on my past with Simon, the flickering glow of the candles casting playful shadows on the walls. Each shadow seemed to dance, reminding me that while darkness has its place, so does light. It was quiet in my little home, the only sounds coming from the soft rustle of the wind against the windows. I allowed my thoughts to drift back to the moments I had spent with Simon, the way his laughter used to fill the air, a brilliant counterpoint to the grim tales he told that left a chill in the spine. There was a time when I thought his peculiar interests in the macabre were merely eccentricities, charming quirks in an otherwise ordinary friendship, until they slowly unraveled into something much darker. I remembered the night I had confronted him about my concerns. It was the weekend we attended that horror festival together, a backdrop of laughter mingled with eerie attractions, a perfect blend of delight and dread. Simon had seemed particularly fixated on one exhibit, a grim display showcasing relics of unsolved mysteries and the minds that perpetrated them. Enthralled and oblivious to my discomfort, he stood there, his wide eyes gleaming with a curiosity that pressed against the boundaries of sanity. I could still hear the precise way he had articulated his thoughts that night, how he spoke of the genius behind the chaos, marveling at the way intelligence could twist into something so unpredictable and horrifying. As much as I loved Simon, I felt compelled to separate myself from that energy, from the way he seemed to absorb the darkness, as if it was a fuel he wanted to consume. We're meant to explore life, not become ensnared in its darkest depths, I had said, and watching the sunlight fade that evening as we parted felt heavy, like ripping apart a thick tapestry we had woven together over years of camaraderie. I wasn't sure if I had saved him from himself or simply turned my back on the friend I remembered. In the months since, life carried on in shades of gray. I reconnected with old friends, leaning into laughter and warmth, rekindling a sense of community I thought I might have lost. Yet, the haunting questions lingered about Simon. Was he okay? Had I been right to walk away? And who was he without me? Each day I navigated these thoughts, trying to reconcile my memories with the resolve I built, telling myself time heals, even from the unseen fractures deep within friendship. One evening, as I thumbed through my usual online haunts, I stumbled upon a recent post that captured my attention. Ask Reddit, what's the creepiest display of intelligence you've seen by another human? Without expecting it, Simon's name flashed in my mind like a beacon through the haze of nostalgia. Curiosity spiraled within me, urging me to dig deeper. I clicked on the thread, half hoping to see a glimpse of him, perhaps a casual mention from some connection we had once shared, but it wasn't that simple. The stories people shared ranged from unsettling encounters with exceptional minds to bone-chilling displays of prodigious talent that had warped into something fearsome and complex. But as I scanned through the comments, talents that had emerged from shadows, one stood out to me, the tale of a brilliant mathematician who had calculated, quite accurately, how many people would evade justice. A subtle gnaw of recognition stirred within me. The writer described a friend who once had a penchant for solving puzzles, but his fixation twisted when he began to dabble in darker conspiracy theories, eventually leading him down a path that caused irrevocable harm. My stomach sank as I read on, the details bleeding into memories. I can't shake the feeling that this could easily have been Simon's path, one I had only narrowly avoided. The shadows of our past lurked in the corners of my mind, urging me to stand closer to the light, that fragile flicker of hope I had clung to. My heart raced, caught between hope and dread, and as I read that post, I felt propelled to reach out to him again, to see what he was doing, where his mind wandered now. I imagined sending him a simple message beginning with, "Hey, it's been a while." But insecurity wrapped around me. What if he had gone too far into those darknesses? I hesitated as twilight bathed my room in hushed shades, comforted by my newfound clarity but fearful of upturning the peace I had built for myself. I closed my eyes and envisioned the warmth of my reconnecting relationships and the laughter shared around the dinner table, anchoring me against the uncertainty swirling inside. But as moments passed, an undeniable whisper beckoned me. Perhaps it was time to bring the light to him, to reach out and remind both of us we weren't alone in this. I went to bed that night with my heart divided, filling one side with hope and leaving the other, a fragment of fear that maybe, just maybe, I'd let darkness tether itself to me again. After all, we had both grown, and I could only hope the connection I built with my new friends might bridge a gap I once feared would swallow us both. The next morning, I finally resolved to send that message, and as I did, a feeling washed over me, a blend of fear and anticipation, illuminated by the lingering hope that both of us could face our shadows together and emerge unscathed, once more into the light. As I hit send, my heart raced, and I held my breath, waiting for yesterday's to echo with the voice of tomorrow. Could it be that simple? I spent years of my life terrified by Simon's erratic behavior, the way his laughter could turn to rage in an instant, spinning our once gentle friendship into a chaotic whirlpool of fear. Yet now, as the sun streamed through my window and enveloped the room in a warm glow, I wondered if there might still be remnants of the boy I once knew buried beneath layers of fear and mistrust. Moments turned into hours as I went about my day, engaging in the comforting routine that had replaced the chaos of my past. I cooked breakfast, buried myself in work, and spent time with friends who made that weight feel lighter. But in the back of my mind, Simon loomed like a distant storm cloud, reminding me that uncertainty still lingered between us. Just as evening approached and I settled into the comforting embrace of my couch, my phone buzzed, Simon's name lighting up the screen. My breath caught in my throat. As I read his message, I could feel the tight grip of anxiety begin to unravel. "Hey, it's good to hear from you. Been a while, huh? We should catch up." Simple words, yet they felt monumental, as though he was extending a hand across a chasm that had once felt insurmountable. We exchanged a few more messages, each filled with a mix of nostalgia and trepidation as we danced around unspoken issues, hinting at our respective journeys over the years. Simon shared stories of his struggles, gently peeling back layers of the fear I had once associated with him. He had sought help and was working towards healing, but it was his admission of vulnerability that shocked me. He spoke of loneliness and the desire for connection that he had hidden behind his bravado for so long. The shadows we both occupied began to intersect, forming a fragile bridge of understanding between us. The next day, we agreed to meet at our old coffee shop, the very place where our friendship had flourished before the darkness invaded our lives. My stomach twisted into knots as I prepared for our reunion, reminding me of those uncertain days back in high school, filled with unspoken promises and dreadful doubts. When I walked into the shop, a sense of familiarity rushed over me. The air was thick with the scent of brewed coffee and pastries, and I spotted Simon. Sitting at our usual table, his fingers tapping anxiously on the wooden surface. It was almost surreal to see him again, the contours of his face softer now, but his eyes carried that same spark of intensity I remembered. As I approached, I could feel my heart thumping loudly in my chest, a quick reminder of the trepidation still residing within. Our conversation started cautiously, filled with awkward laughter and small talk, each of us carefully navigating the landscape of our shared history. But as we delved deeper, the air shifted. Simon shared his journey, the therapy, the revelations, the regrets, and I shared my own, how the darkness of our past had forced me to redefine my relationships and prioritize my well-being. With each exchanged word, the timing seemed to feel less about reliving the past and more about grasping a future together. There was honesty in our confessions, a mutual understanding that built a resilience we both had lacked for so long. Just as we were beginning to find our footing, however, Simon's expression darkened. A brief silence settled between us, and I could see the pulse of memory crossing his face, a flicker of that old weight surfacing. "I still struggle with some days, you know?" he confessed, his gaze turning away. "There are shadows that feel familiar, and I sometimes forget how to step into the light." The vulnerability in his tone mirrored my own lingering fears, but instead of retreating, something instinctive stirred within me. "We can help each other," I suggested softly, not fully realizing how significant those words would be. "That's what friendship is, right? Clinging to the light even when everything else seems dark?" In that moment, the connection we built felt tangible, almost electric. We mapped out a strategy to support one another, regular meetups, sharing the burdens when either of us appeared to drift back toward the shadows. The coffee shop transformed into a haven of hope as we shared plans and dreams, and for the first time, I felt the familiar tug of an authentic friendship rekindling itself. Days turned into weeks, our meetings grew to be the highlight of our weeks, and little by little, I forgot the fear that once threatened to hold me hostage. We illuminated one another's paths, slowly building a friendship forged in honesty and vulnerability, teaching both of us that our pasts did not define our futures. And while the shadows still loomed faintly at the edges of my consciousness, I knew that they could no longer control me. I glanced at my phone one night while reminiscing and saw countless messages exchanged with Simon. It felt almost strange to think how far we had come from the chaos of last year. I smiled, reflecting on our journey, feeling that tether of fear dissipate, replaced with a shared commitment to shine brightly, together. Sometimes we'd stumble, but we were no longer alone. And that, I realized, was how we would continue to emerge unscathed. As the moonlight streamed through my window, illuminating the edges of my room, a thought settled within me. Perhaps true intelligence isn't merely about what we know, but about the connections we forge and the willingness to embrace vulnerability.